Hey everybody, welcome to this free video coming here from Milwaukee Music Lessons. We're doing another mixing tutorial today, and today we are going to cover the basics surrounding compression. Compression, I feel like, is one of the most misunderstood and most misused tools in our arsenal, and a good sound engineer can really do some magic, some wonders with compression. You can even, if you know how to use a compressor right, can even fix certain EQ issues with a compressor. So I guess first and foremost, we should talk a bit about what a compressor actually is. A compressor is designed to help limit the volume of a track in a given direction, and that could be the bottom of the track, or that could also be the top of the track. And so shown in front of me on the screen here is the Pro Tools default compressor. I wanted to use the default one because I didn't want anybody thinking I was using something fancy. There are definitely much fancier compressors out there, both digital and also analog recreations, and we could certainly spend a lot of time going over those, but today this is just about going over the fundamentals, the basics, and how everything works. So looking at what we have in front of us visually, I want to focus on the kind of the arc in front of us, this line, this graph that we have built here. So you can see that we have a slope that goes here from the bottom left corner of our graph and works its way up until it reaches this line. And that line is controlled here by the threshold. And what the threshold is going to do is it's going to determine when we need to start reducing some of the volume that's coming in. So if I set the threshold to 0, the left side of our graph represents what the actual decibel level is, and the right side represents what it would be had it not been tampered with by the compressor. And so if I set our threshold to 0 here, the compressor is off for all intents and purposes. It's not going to kick in because there's nothing that it can possibly remove. But if I start to move the threshold further and further down, you see that this white line that goes across, it starts to get a little bit of a bend, an angle. And that's because that's where this line hits. If the volume reaches this orange line, this threshold, then it's going to start pulling down the volume so that way it can't get any louder than what this line represents. That's the basics of a compressor. If you want kind of a crude representation of what something might be like in real life, you can imagine that you're jumping on a pogo stick inside, like in your basement, okay? And maybe your basement has a 10-foot high ceiling. And so your pogo stick, you can go all the way down from the floor until your head hits the ceiling. You've got 10 feet to work with, right? But with a compressor, you can artificially lower that ceiling, so that way now if your head would have normally made it to 9 or 9.5 feet, well, guess what? You lowered the ceiling down to 8 feet. So your head is going to hit the ceiling starting at 8 feet, and that's going to limit how high you can jump. And so that's kind of a crude representation here with our compressor, what that does. Now obviously there's a whole bunch of knobs here in front of me. There's about 8 of them. We're gonna go really into depth on these main 6 that are right in front of us, because these are the most important ones, I think. So we already talked a little bit about threshold. That's where the compressor starts to kick in, right? The one above it, the red one here, is gain. And so this is used to kind of make up the difference between what the compressor is pulling down. So for example, if you're letting a track run and you can see that the compressor is pulling down, 3, 4, 5, 6 decibels quite a bit, you might decide, all right, because it's pulling down, 3 or 4 or 5 decibels, we're gonna turn the gain up. So now it's like we've raised the floor in the basement a little bit. We pulled the ceiling down first, and now we raise the floor up a little bit as well to compensate for that distance that we lost with the ceiling. It's really more like you pulled the whole room up is what it's like. It's not just the floor, but like you move the entire room up 2 feet for that 2 feet that you lost when you lowered the ceiling. So that's our gain here. And it operates just like any other gain. You know, like if you're operating your preamp and you're setting the gain at the beginning, it works very similar to that. So it'll affect everything after it in your audio chain. So you really want to make sure that when you're setting your gain here, you're getting it right early, because anything else that you put after the fact is going to be affected by it. Okay, so let's work our way over to the left side next, because I think this is a little bit simpler. So next we have ratio, and ratio determines how hard this compressor is going to limit once we hit the threshold. So if I go backwards and I set it to 1:1 to 1 is how it's represented here, you see that the line completely straightens out. Again, you're basically turning off the compressor by doing this. But as you start to increase that number, right, now you're at a 2:1 ratio. So past this point, if you had gone up, you know, if you would have gone like say 10 decibels higher than this point, you're really now only going 5 decibels. So you've effectively reduced that extra volume after this threshold by 50%. As you increase that number, you can see that the arch starts to get lower and lower, and so the compressor is going to be more and more effective as you continue to increase that number. It's going to be until eventually you more or less hit a brick wall. This is when it turns into what's called a limiter, which is basically just a brick wall compressor that stops you from going any higher wherever you set this threshold. I would say that the applications vary quite a bit. You know, if you're doing like nice speaking representations, you might set your ratio fairly low, like a 2:1 or a 3:1. Or if you're doing very nice, like natural acoustic type of stuff, you might set it very low. There's definitely a lot of styles of music though where you might see this ratio get very, very, very high. Especially there's a lot of stuff. We could spend hours talking about compression and all the various tricks that people have come up with. You might even see one here when I get done with this representation, but there's a lot of reasons too why you might make this ratio incredibly high on a track or on a side track or something else. So there's, yeah, the ratio, as ridiculous as it might seem, this ratio definitely does get used. Okay, next we have to talk a little bit about knee. So knee it's basically a softening of this point where the threshold starts to take place. So if I set my ratio here, we'll say it's 7:1, and I start to increase this knee, you'll see that the edge where the threshold meets becomes softer and softer and softer. And so that compressor is really starting to kick in slower and slower, or it's starting to become more gradual, as opposed to if I set the knee to 0, then the exact point where it starts to compress is 30 decibels, minus 30 dB here. But if I set the knee higher, it starts to compress a little bit earlier, and it doesn't really hit its full ratio until later. So it's a little bit more of a natural transition as it starts to go into that compressor. So that's what our knee is. Okay, so we've covered 4 out of the 6 here on this main panel. These last 2, attack and release, are probably the things that I see get screwed up the most. And so we have to talk about what they do and why they make a difference. So first we have the attack here. And the dirty little secret about compression is that even though we set this limit here, this threshold, when the audio hits the threshold, it doesn't just instantly get pulled down. There's actually a moment in time where the compressor is going to allow the audio to go briefly past the threshold that we've set, and then it's going to pull it back down. And that's what the attack represents. The faster the attack, the more strict that this compressor is going to be, and it's going to pull it back down towards the line. Whereas the slower that it is, the longer it's going to take to let it come back down. Now, why is this important and how does this affect our audio? Well, we talk a lot about transients, and transients are like the impulses, the quickness of a sound wave. And there's a lot of detail involved in those impulses, right? It's why studio owners spend so much money on microphones and speakers, because even if you could theoretically EQ out all of the terrible EQ that comes from a bad microphone or a bad speaker, you still have to worry about good transients coming from the speaker, that level of detail, right? If you've ever gone from listening to a song on a really bad speaker to a really good speaker, there's a ton of details that you'll notice. It's not that it's just clearer from the EQ standpoint. It's also that you're hearing all sorts of little artifacts, things like reverb and ambience become way more detailed because those tiny little microscopic responses are very, very fast, and they require very, very quick impulse responses and very high-end speakers to be able to do that. So now that I've gone a little bit off on a tangent on transients and impulse responses, our attack helps control those transients and those impulse responses. And so oftentimes if you make an attack quicker, the faster frequencies are the higher frequencies, and the slower frequencies are the low end frequencies. So if you were, for example, working on like a kick drum and the bottom end was too boomy, you might be able to help reduce some of that boominess by increasing the attack, which would help control the low end, but also create the top end to be a little bit clickier, right? You can also too, like if you're working on a bass guitar, a lot of times it's not uncommon, especially if they're playing very, very hard, they might be hitting really fast with really fast with their fingers and creating a lot of string noise. And that string noise, it sticks out really, really quickly. You can increase the attack, make it very, very fast, and that'll help control some of those quick instant transients, those quick instant responses coming from the bass guitar. So learning how to use attack, we could spend, again, a lot of time talking about it, but we just need to understand that, all right, the quicker the attack, the faster that compressor is going to pull the audio down, and the slower the attack, the more it's going to let through on the initial responses, and the more natural it's going to sound to a certain extent. So that's attack. And release is the exact opposite. So release is, after it hits this threshold, the volume's eventually going to reduce, and the compressor is going to have to start alleviating how much compression that it pulls back down on it. When you have the release happen, the release is controlling how fast that compressor lets off. So if the compressor pulls down minus 10 decibels and then he goes below the threshold, if the release is, say, set to 200 milliseconds or 1/5 of a second, it's going to take 1/5 of a second for that compressor to release back to normal. And again, you can control all sorts of stuff, transients, extra responses and stuff on the back end, reverb, stuff like that. You can help control some of this with a release. And it just kind of depends on your preference, your needs, the style of music that you're playing. But sometimes I've definitely heard people really screw up their sound, even though they might have the right intentions by using a compressor. If you set the release and the attack wrong, you can really mess up your audio, and to a level where no EQ is really going to properly fix it. So anyways, that is kind of the quick and dirty rundown. It really wasn't quick because, like I said, there's so much detail that you could spend really getting compression right. But I thought it might be worth it to go just over a quick example here. I have a song that I mixed not that long ago by a local band called Groove Lane. This is a song called Drowning, and there's a lot of compression on a lot of these parts. I didn't actually use this EQ, or this compressor, excuse me, to compress on it. I used some analog compressors, and I'll show you what that sounds like at the end, but I wanted to do just kind of a quick and dirty compression here on this vocal. So let's first listen to it in the mix without any compression. I just have a little bit of EQ on him right now and a little bit of vocal reverb, and that is all that is on him, specifically just his track at the moment here. So let's just take a listen to it.
Water's all around me, feeling like I'm drowning. I don't know just what I should do. Listening to the voices, giving me the choices, but I still don't know what to do. About you.
All right, so that is a much quicker, that's a much more bare bones vocal that we've got going on right now. So let's play around a little bit with the compression, and we can kind of hear. I'm gonna loop some of this, just so we can kind of hear it in context. Let's just loop it, and we'll see what we can make out of it real quick.
Water's all around me, feeling like I'm drowning. I don't know just what I should do. Listening to the voices, giving me the choices, but I still don't know what to do. Water's all around me, feeling like I'm drowning. I don't know just what I should do. Listening to the voices, giving me the choices, but I still don't know what to do. Water's all around me, feeling like I'm drowning. I don't know just what I should do. Listening to the voices, giving me the choices, but I still don't know what to do. Water's all around me, feeling like I'm drowning. I don't know just what I should do.
Okay, cool. So let's listen to a quick before and after. So we have a before.
Water's all around me, feeling like I'm drowning. I don't know just what I should do.
All right, and an after.
Water's all around me, feeling like I'm drowning. I don't know just what I should do. Listening to the voices, giving me the choices, but I still don't know what to do.
All right, so you can hear now with that compressor that his vocals, it's probably a little bit too loud compared to where I had it. I should probably take this gain down just a little bit, 1 or 2 dB. It's just a little bit hotter than before, but it's so much more smooth and consistent. His voice sticks out in the mix way better. You don't have to worry about, listening and hearing, okay, what is he saying at the end of a phrase? You can even tell just by looking at the waveforms. It's like he has some spots where he's coming in a little bit hotter, some spots where he's coming in a little bit quieter, and this compressor just kind of evens all of that out. In a song where you're fighting against, maybe 30, 40, 50 other tracks to try and stay, where you're supposed to be in the mix, it's good to have something that basically is more or less pushing and pulling the fader exactly where you need it to be, so that way it sticks right where it is. Doesn't mean that there aren't times where we're going to need to do automation. That's a whole nother video for a whole nother time, but the compression definitely saves you a lot of work, a lot of headache, and yeah, it's an engineer's, it's one of their bread and butter tools. Definitely spend time getting comfortable with it. You're going to make lots of mistakes in your mixes if you've never used a compressor before, but keep working at it. It will definitely be a difference maker if you know how to use your compression properly. Anyways, that's going to do it for this video. If you have any questions for me or any comments or anything else you'd like me to cover, please let me know. Don't be afraid to shoot me a message. This has been Alex Bennett, and I will see you guys later.